Hi everyone and welcome to our video on poetic sound devices. First off, make sure that you have your notebook set up correctly, that you have your video visa on the left side ready to use to reflect on the video after you're done watching it, and that you have your note taker on the right. Make sure you're following along and using the video to accurately complete your notes. Pause the video to give you time to write, and remember to use your best handwriting because if you can't read it, it's not going to help you. And I do suggest to rewatch the video at least once after you're done writing so that you can make sure that you didn't miss anything while you were pausing. So your note taker looks like this. We're going to go over what are poetic sound devices. Then I'm going to give you the sound and definition of several of them, and you have the example already written there for you, but I'm going to give you the connection to the definition. So first off, poetic sound devices. These are the words and phrases that a poet uses to create specific effects in a poem. They create meaning through their sounds and patterns. So just like this says, this is the sounds that the poem creates or uses, and you really need to pay attention to why does the poet use them? What is the meaning behind it? How does it affect your comprehension of the poem, the meaning behind each of the words of the poem, and just the overall feeling that it gives to you. So it's important to not only recognize these sound devices, but to analyze them as well to decide why they're there and how they affect the poem. So let's start off with rhyme. Make sure you write this under the sound column. This is your first sound. And the definition of rhyme is the matching sounds at the end of several words or lines of a poem. Remember that this is talking about the sounds and not necessarily the spelling. We know that in the English language, different letters and letter combinations can make the same sound even when the letters don't match. So make sure you're paying attention to how it sounds. And the example that you already have on your notes is roses are red, violets are blue. I'm out of my head with thinking of you. And this is a perfect example of what I was talking about. Here, red and head rhyme, even though they are spelled differently. Blue and you rhyme, even though they are spelled differently. The next sound we have is meter. So make sure you write that under the sound column. This is your second one. The definition of meter is the rhythmic pattern of a poem revealed by the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. So this is how the poem sounds when you are saying it, okay? The way that your voice rises and falls shows you that pattern. For example, I will not play at tug-o-war. I rather play at hug-o-war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug. You can see that there's a very specific pattern to the way that the poem is written, and this is the poem Hug-o-War by Shel Silverstein, and that is the meter of the poem. The next sound we have is repetition. The definition of this is the repeated use of a certain word or phrase within a poem to make a point. Anytime that you see something repeated throughout a poem, obviously it's put there for a reason, right? It's repeated for a reason. So you really have to stop and think, why is the poet continuously using this in the poem? What are they trying to say with it? And the example you have here says, I'm carsick, open a window. I'm carsick, take this pill. And it's the poem Carsick by Amy L.V. And the repeated phrase here is, I'm carsick. Obviously, in this part, it's to emphasize that the person speaking, the speaker, is carsick. And then every other line is kind of like a recommendation that they're getting by somebody to help them get rid of their carsickness. The next poetic sound device is alliteration. The definition of that is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of several words in the same line. This is different than repetition and that rhyme because this one is at the beginning of several words, and you have to make sure that this is the consonant sounds. So all of the letters that are not vowels are your consonants. The example you have here is a pretty popular tongue twister. I think this is one of the places that you'll find alliteration very often. But this is a good example of just how the consonant is repeated over and over. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, right? You have the sound P from the consonant P that's getting repeated over and over. One important thing to note is that alliteration isn't always a tongue twister. This was just an example to show you what alliteration looks like. The next sound is onomatopoeia. That almost sounds like a tongue twister. The definition is the use of a word that represents a sound. This one is pretty simple. You have boom, zap, pow. All of those are not actual words, right? They don't have their own meaning. The reason they're used is to give an example of the sound that something creates. You have the example here. The sand is crunching beneath my feet. Boom, crash, crunch, crunch. Again, those words are meant to represent the sound of the sand underneath someone's feet as they're going down the beach. And this is from the poem Beach Orchestra by Phil Buffalo. The next sound is assonance. The definition of that is the repetition of vowel sounds within words in the same or close line. Sometimes it might be the line above it, below it, but it has to be very close in order to count as assonance. For example, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. We have A-I-N. Ain is the sound of those vowels. A and I, they come together and they are repeated over and over in each of these words. And you'll notice that it's not just the rhyme at the end, but inside the line as well. Then you have consonants. The definition of that is the repetition of consonant sounds within words that are usually one right after the other. The example you have here is they have a bond that transcends the beyond. Again, this is different than rhyme, right? It's not repeated at the end of the line necessarily, but that nd is repeated throughout several words in that line, and that makes it consonants. So now you have your note taker full with the different sounds and their definition. The example was already there for you. Remember that it's important for you to be able to look for these sounds throughout a poem, but not only just identify them, but explain their significance and explain their impact on the meaning of the poem. So make sure that you know how to do that, okay? Make sure that your notes are accurately completed and that you've done your visa to help you reflect on the video. Post your part A, which is the ask a question in Google Classroom or wherever else your teacher has asked you to do so, and be ready to discuss the video and apply the skill. Like I was just mentioning, go a little bit beyond just identifying the sounds, but explaining their significance and their impact on the poem.